to the Wellspring Real World podcast, building real faith in a real world. We wanted to kind of do this kind of setting as a podcast because we are always having conversations about how things that are going on in our world and how does faith play into those. So a few weeks ago, we did an interview with Dina Arce, Christian counselor, and Dr. Jeff Neuenhaus, where they talked about how during this pandemic, how mental health kind of connects with that and talked about faith. And it was a really powerful conversation. So if you haven't checked that out, I'll leave it down below in the description box. You can watch that. But today we wanted to sit around as a staff and kind of chew on this topic from our perspective. So today we have...
Gabriel?
Yeah?
Yep, I'm worship leader at Wellspring.
Cool.
Cool, and I'm Jordan. I run the youth ministry here at Wellspring.
Jason, lead pastor here.
Cool. And I'm Graham, executive pastor here at Wellspring. So we're just going to jump right into it. So question one, how do unmet expectations impact our mental health? Man, this is such a you could probably do a whole podcast just on unmet expectations. But when you guys think of this topic, you think about, you've watched the interview, how does mental health and unmet expectations kind of hit you?
I feel like it's everything. Like it's like it affects our faith in the sense of like how much do we look at God and say like you didn't meet my expectations, and it brings us to this crisis of faith, which absolutely has to have a mental health aspect to it. And then we had a lot of expectations on how 2020 was going to go, and that went to crap by the end of March. And it's dealing with, this is not how I envisioned life going right now. Like none of us could have.
From a personal standpoint, even going like a level of the personal side of this, like I was like, all right, you know what, May and June, those are my months that I get fit. You know, I was thinking, you know, we got bulking season during the winter and stuff, and I'm like, you know, May and June, the basketball courts open up, and I'm out there every night playing, and that wasn't there for me. So here's an expectation that I even take of physical health. Now that expectation isn't being met. We've talked about not being able to go to the gym and different habits that we have of eating that have led us to like, man, I really don't like the way my body looks right now or the way that I feel. Yeah. So like that has affected, I feel like in a lot of ways that's affected my mental health and my even perception of like, you know, what I look like or how I feel too, you know. One
of my favorite lines is expectations lead to future resentments. And I think for me, one of the things that's kind of, we put a lot of expectations on God.
Yeah.
So we had we had visions. We all got out of January, like 2020 is going to be our year. Like God's going to see us do things. And then all of that within a matter of a week went up in smoke. And so I think a lot of us have probably struggled with our faith. And again, we're talking about how like mental health and our faith kind of connect, where we got to a position of like, God, what are you doing? I had my year planned out. I had my ministry planned out. I had my purpose planned out. I had all these things. And we're probably some of us watching this. And I know I've kind of had moments of this of like, I'm resentful towards God because I had these expectations, and God, you, I mean, if we're bold enough, you failed me. Like I had this going on and now I don't know what to do. And, you know, talking about like being in this pandemic and isolation and loneliness, I think a lot of us are probably circling that drain of like, man, what am I doing?
For me, it also sometimes changes the way I approach God in a sense because I had high expectations of how 2020 was going to go. It didn't go that well. Now my prayer kind of changed to, God, help me when hard times come to stay firm and to have a healthy spiritual life versus I had no idea this was going to happen. I'm struggling. And, you know, we see in this world that there's some warnings about some hardship we're going to encounter. And that expectation helps us cry out to God to ask for preparation when things get tougher. You know?
And it goes to like part of that prayer is like there's like this almost movement. I still kind of like am wishy-washy with it, but almost this movement of like, you pray it into existence. Like you pray like, God, I'm praying this and I'm going to pray with the expectation that this is going to happen. Like that's kind of like a testament of faith. I prayed some stuff at the beginning of 2020 that at that time God must have like, you have just no clue. Then it's like reshaping your expectations. So like we're saying this like with expectations of like how by the end of March all of our expectations got blown up, but then mental health the battle there was almost like, okay, we're readjusting our expectations, thinking that this will only last a month, thinking that this will be over soon, thinking that this will just, okay, well, but then all of a sudden, like, even like in the midst of it, God was saying, like, what, you can expect nothing.
Yeah.
Like, you can, like, here's where you take because our expectations is oftentimes like where we're putting our confidence. Like, here's what you can expect. I got you.
Yeah.
Here's where your confidence
Right.
is. And that seeing like old things as truly dead and then reestablishing our expectations and the only thing that is living, Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah, it goes in that point of like, who is our idol? Who is our God? Well, for a lot of us, our expectations, our goals, our habits became our God. And when all that wiped away, it's like, well, what am I left? And I think a lot of us had to get punched in the stomach of like, oh, maybe God hasn't really been my God in some areas of my life. Yeah. And so I think for those of us that have kind of like, are kind of getting up out of the hole right now, it's because we're coming to terms with like, yeah, I have to, my trust is in God, my confidence is in God, my plans are in God. And for those of us that are still struggling, it's probably we're still wrestling with this idea of who's really controlling my life. So one of the other things that in the interview that they talked about, and I know we've all kind of had this same conversation, is this idea of how important sleep is to mental health.
Oh, yeah.
And this idea of sleep deprivation leads to struggle and poor perspective on life. So I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about how have you seen in your own life poor sleep impact you, and how do you protect yourself if you do?
So Dina Arce is your mom,
My mother.
right? And so
She's a wonderful woman.
I love being on Team Arce with your mom. So like, this is something that impacted you, I know, through pandemic.
Yeah.
So just go ahead and tell your mom she's right, and then how was that? What was that?
My mother is always right. Sleep is something that I think I'm young and fun, and I try to fit a lot of things in between, when I wake up to when I go to sleep. I try to get the whole world solved and every amount of fun that I can have. And, a lot of nights that ends at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning in my room, like trying to fit in my time with God or trying to fit in my time reading a book or something that I'm supposed to be working on. And, I really felt over pandemic, there was so much freedom in our schedules where, I don't have to be here at this time. I don't have to be there at this time. Everything's shut down. Like, the only thing I know is I got to get to the store by 7 o'clock before it closes. So it just gave us this freedom to live by. And it really like took away our boundaries and our restrictions. So what that did to someone like myself who wasn't really disciplined with my sleep schedule or even much of my schedule at all was I had all this freedom to work at 2 o'clock in the morning and sleep till noon if I needed to. And what that really did was put me in a place where, I didn't have a healthy mind to be doing the work that I was doing. And we've talked how, so many people right now are struggling with apathy and feeling like a lack of passion towards life or a lack of passion towards what God's calling them to do or asking them to do, or even just like a passion to get out of bed and do something, and I was feeling that for about a month there. I think it was about a month and a half ago. I was really feeling this deep apathy, just like, man, I'm struggling. There's no flavor in life. There's no passion in life. And I really stemmed that back to 1, my physical rest, and 2, my spiritual rest with Christ. Just that alone time with God, just God, me and you, restore me, refresh me. And, God provides us with that Sabbath. It's a commandment to take that Sabbath because he knows we need that physical rest, but that physical rest also helps our spiritual rest as well.
Now, for you too, like thinking of what you just said, if left unchecked, mentally, that can take you, I got you to a dark place, but it can take you to a really dark place. Yeah. And I think that for a lot of us that's one of the reasons why sleep needs to be so protected. Yeah. I think for me, sleep is, man, I forget who it was, but someone said one of the greatest discipleship lessons is get a good night's sleep. Because I know for me, let's say I get in a conversation with somebody, if I haven't slept well, my mind takes conversations in places that they don't need to be. Right. Like, did they really say that? Like, what did they really mean? And I always go dark. Now, a lot of times I'll just go to bed, wake up in the morning and be like, oh no, that was fine. I was being an idiot. But so you let that go night after night after night after night, man, it affects your relationships.
Read an email when you're exhausted and then when you're energized. Right. And you read it 2 completely different ways.
Yeah, 100%.
Also, God needs our best, and he needs the best of ourselves. And I think rest is important for us to give him the best version of us for him to use it for his glory. And that's connected to, sleeping well, having a good night's sleep, like you said. It's important to be in good shape for that.
I mean, we value simplicity, and I see Dr. Newhouse. He can't tell you that, but I can tell you that. I see him regularly to check in on my mental health, and a time where I was stressing mentally, just in a really dark place, and he asked me, like, well, how's your sleep? And I was like, it's fine. And then I checked my Fitbit app, and I realized for like 4 or 5 weeks straight, my average was under 6 hours. It was in like the low 5s. Yeah. And he's like, well, that's clinically sleep deprivation. And I was like, okay, so what? Like, I'm an animal. And so he's like, no, like,
test me.
You have to get at least 6 hours. Yeah. Like, that has to be your average. And so, like, I made that one simple shift, and just that perspective shift, just that, like, okay, where my default might be instantly to see something dark, it still might be my default, but I don't live in the dark as long. Right. It shortens that curve, and just there's something about waking up refreshed, and like how that helps you attack your day, and that, like, of course it's gonna help your mental health. Like, you're giving your mind some literal rest. Right.
So as we kind of wrap up, this is the last question for today. If you kind of take what your conversation was, a lot of it came down to like thankfulness, perspective. So in your kind of own walk, and when you think about mental health, how do you see thankfulness playing out in your mind? Do you see, I mean, is it a driver for you? Is it unneeded for you? Like, or is it?
You have to. Like we did a whole series on glass half empty, and to view the glass as half empty is to live empty. And like, there is so much to be thankful for. And so, like, when life hits the fan, when a pandemic happens, all of the things that we were making idols and that we were thankful for, now we have to redirect to God, and God, you are truly where I'm thankful. And I always have you. I always have a source of gratitude. And then to say, like, to get to the point where, like, okay, you needed to kill this, I'm thankful you killed it. Like to be like, wow, that hurts. But like that whole notion, like, as a Christian, like, to be thankful for the pruning, to be thankful of God stripping back, and to trust that he's going to bring something better. It, like, then all of a sudden, like, what God is stripping back, a source of being grateful, then you start getting excited that this is an opportunity. And it's like, okay, God, I can do this. I can attack opportunity if I'm not dwelling on what looks like a missed opportunity.
One of my favorite things to do, someone discipled me in this. I walked in someone's office, and I was just railing on them and how awful my life was and how everything was going wrong. And he called me out, and he was like, you don't really seem thankful. I want you to take the next week, and all I want you to pray about is being thankful.
The advice you gave me.
And that I have.
But you gave me that too.
And I have literally told so many people that, because when you shift your perspective, it's amazing how everything changes. And again, I love watching it. Like, someone comes to you and is like, oh, my life's not great. And you spend 5 minutes with them saying, hey, what about this? What about this? And by the end of the conversation, you literally see their body language change of like, man, I've had a bad perspective. I didn't realize all the things God was doing, or how great, how many things I have to be grateful for. And again, you can literally see a physical manifestation of what gratefulness does to your demeanor. And
so you gave me that advice, and so I'm going to ask you, like, it brought me to a place of worship. Did you see that connection? Like,
because
why?
A place of gratitude, especially in terms of faith, it has to bring you back to worship, because you're thinking, God, thank you for you giving me this. Thank you for giving me this. And if you have faith, I don't see another direction it can take you.
Okay.
And that's what it was for me. And when you're in a place of worship, because I don't think you can be in a place of worship and not be thankful. I don't think those things can coexist, because if you're unthankful, who are you worshiping? So I think, and I mean, that goes for any of us. Like, if you're in a place where, like, I don't feel like I can worship, you're probably lacking gratitude. There's something in your heart. There's something in your heart and life that is building a wedge between you not being able to worship God. So, and that's what I think I love about gratitude and worship, is they're really in tandem to me.
Great.
Yeah, I find that for me with gratitude, I think the thing that helps me a lot is looking back at God's faithfulness in the past. Because I could be walking through something right now that hurts so bad and I'm struggling through, and I don't see, how could God possibly make this good? How could God possibly turn what the enemy meant for evil into good? And I'm sitting here like, there's no way that, I can have gratitude in this situation. But I think when we can recount God's faithfulness in the past and past struggles and past times and past hurt, and we can see how God gets glory through everything that goes on, we can look at our current situation and say, you know what, like you were saying, this is an opportunity to endure and to see God's faithfulness in this, and to lean on God's strength and help me walk through this situation right now, which is just leads us back to that praise and worship of I'm so grateful that like, that's the God that I have. That's the God that I serve, that I know is always faithful and will always be strong enough to hold everything together.
Well, we had a kind of off the cuff conversation before this podcast about kind of Old Testament. And that's what I love about, but scripture is like, it takes you in of going, man, if God could do that, why couldn't he do it for me? Right. And I think having a healthy perspective of scripture, but like, if you're not in scripture and you're not seeing what God's done, and when we say we are more than conquerors, why? Well, if you don't have scripture, then how would you know that? How would you be able to feel that? How would you get to see how God through the ages has done incredible things through people? So I think that's a lot of times that next step of like, man, what is your kind of scripture reading like? Are you spending time with God? Because if you're not in prayer, you're not spending time with God, man, it's very easy to get lost in your own mind. And man, the worst perspective you can have is what comes from within.
And that, like, with the scope of history now, like, we can all attest God can bring blessing out of anything. And so for me, like, if you can't make the most of a blessing if you never see the blessing. And so, like, when I'm focused on the negative, I don't see the blessing, so I can't then make the most of the blessing. And so, like, when I was focused on the negative, I don't see the blessing of extra time with my kids. When I don't see the blessing of, we get Friday as our day off. Like, that's a blessing. Okay, yeah, we have to work on Sundays, but, like, when we focus in on, when we lose sight of, like, this is a blessing, so make the most of this. Like, that's true throughout pandemic. Like, we're working from home, or we're, like, hours, or, like, we're not so busy with schedules, right? You can look at that negatively, but if you look at it as a blessing, you'll treat it differently.
Well, that goes to your point of that original question, expectations. How are you defining blessing? And I think this is where a lot of us get in trouble too, is like, well, I had this expectation of what blessing in my life was going to be like. That did not align with scripture. That did not align with what God had for you.
God doesn't owe me this.
Right. So when you see well, that's not the blessing I wanted. And so basically you're saying, God, what you gave me isn't good enough. I think that's a place that, man, we all need to gut check it.
Thanks, man.
For me, this sounds cliche, but when I think about thankful, I think about heaven. And I think about, this is all temporary. This is all going to pass away one day. And to think about, what awaits for us, is just fills me to be thankful and to see, the glass half full.
Absolutely.
That helps me a lot.
Cool. Well, that's it for this episode of the Wellspring Real World Podcast. So I want to thank our table here.
Gabe.
Cool.
Jordan.
Yep.
Jason.
Cool. And Graham. So if you like this episode, be sure to share it with someone. I'm sure a lot of the topics that were talked about today, there's someone, either it's you personally or someone in your life that could be encouraged by the stuff we were talking about today. So share this. If you're listening to on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. It's so helpful to get the message out. So that's it for this week's episode. Again, we hope to see you somewhere on Wellspring social media. We'd love to get connected with you.
See you guys.